News. Tonight is a special live broadcast of the Memo. I'm your host, Franklin Sims. Our team wants to welcome you to a different brand of local news. At the Memo, we have three core principles: hold ourselves accountable to the facts, restore a balanced perspective to local news in Long Beach, and finally, showcase how the city, its families, and small businesses make Long Beach incredibly fun. Our program is community-centered and interactive. We're live, so we encourage you to give us your comments, shower us with likes and thumbs up, and let's get ready now to dive in to the Memo. Tonight's first topic isn't any fun at all. It's real life, and it can be ugly. If the steady rise in shootings in Long Beach has taught us anything, it's that there is little more important than our health and safety. The entire nation is reeling from COVID-19 related deaths. And as COVID-19 restrictions lift in the city, there is a rising and dangerous statistic that's persisted for months now. It's the shootings happening across our city. Rarely does more than a few days pass without another shooting in working-class Long Beach neighborhoods. 130 shootings were reported between January and March of this year. Data is not yet available for April. According to the Long Beach Post, that's 145% more than this time last year. Murders are also on the uptick. There were 22 in 2017, 30 in 2018, 34 in 2019, and 36 in 2020. Shootings are a foreseeable reality in most major American cities, but it's the lack of accountability by our local police chief and some local public officials that leaves residents feeling insecure here at home. For 6 months now, we've all witnessed the lack of accountability. If you recall, the January night of Mayor Garcia's State of the City address, a shooting occurred, almost precisely in time with the mayor's declaration that the state of the city is strong. Now, nearly 6 months later, week after week, there's shooting after shooting in working-class neighborhoods. Like you, we want answers. So on tonight's panel, we have retired Deputy Police Chief Stephen Downing, Research Professor Emeritus Dr. Alex Norman. Deputy Police Chief Downing served as commanding officer in South Central Los Angeles. He designed and implemented the first functionally integrated police operation to combat gang activity, a program that became a national model. Retired, Mr. Downing regularly contributes articles to the Beachcomber on topics relating to reforming our Long Beach Police Department. Then there's Dr. Alex Norman, who was a civil rights worker before serving as director of the Department of Urban Affairs. He spent more than 2 decades in academia, and in 1992 retired as professor emeritus at the UCLA Luskin School of Public Affairs. It's a lot of brain power on one show, but this is a tough question. The question is, what can be done to solve the shooting crisis facing our city? Well, thank you for being here, Mr. Downing. Thank you as well, Professor. If you don't mind, I'd like to dive right in. Mr. Downing, this data, 130 shootings reported between January and March. You heard it. Just in 2020, there were 36 shootings. When you hear data like this, what goes through your mind as from the perspective of a former law enforcement officer?
Well, first of all, I'm familiar with that data because I read it in the Long Beach Post. And my question is, why didn't I read it as a result of some kind of a report or study published by the city? Why can't I read it by going to a website at the Long Beach Police Department and see a breakdown of the nature of the shootings? What kind of shootings are we talking about? Are we talking about family disputes? Are we talking about gangs? Are we talking about ride-bys? Are we talking about shooting at private dwellings? We don't know. And I think the reason we don't know is because there is no leadership to say, we better know. I have been watching for the last 5 years the meetings of the city's Public Safety Committee. This is the committee that is supposed to work with the police department and develop policy and develop approaches. And I have watched time and again Susie Price is the chairman. We have a new chairman coming up, the new councilwoman. They asked the chief, the chief provides excuses for problems. He always leans on the progressive laws that are trying to deal with mass incarceration by saying, oh, it's a revolving door. And then he's asked about studies, what are your statistics, what's this? And he never has them. And then Susie Price will ask him, well, can you give me a report? Yes, how soon can you have it to me? Well, I'll have it a week. A month later, I checked with Susie's office, I checked with the police department, there is no report. So there is no real analysis of the nature of the problem in the city, and shootings is only one of them. We're happy to spend $125,000 on artificial intelligence software during the pandemic to study public reaction to actions of the city so that we can be sure that our ribbons are cut properly and our PR is good. But we're not spending $125,000 like engaging the doctor to engage the university to engage in a study to look at these shootings.
Let me talk with you about engagement. So as you kind of walked us through what typically happens with that committee, I noticed that you were referring to Councilwoman Susie Price being chair. Well, the fact is, she's no longer chair now. In January, the mayor did a switcheroo, and now we have the councilwoman of the 6th district, newly elected, replaced Councilman D. Andrews. Now she's there. But this is the thing. Up until recently, you couldn't cite any meeting that she even had. She had her first meeting nearly, I think it was April, and it may have been later.
Here's what it is. There's been one meeting in all of 2021, and that was in April. In 2020, there were 5 meetings. In 2019, 18, 2017, 2016, each year, there were only 3 meetings of the Public Safety Council. Well, this is a large city, a very large city. Our council should be meeting every day. Our Public Safety Committee should be meeting more frequently, but they're not. They're all in lockstep.
Let me get to Dr. Norman. Dr. Norman, much of the violent shootings in Long Beach occur in districts where we have African American councilmen, and they hold office. Now, in your recent book, I have it here, African American Leadership at the Crossroads, you call the reluctant behavior on the part of elected officials the Long Beach way, or the go along to get along mentality. Do you think that the reluctance of elected officials to grapple with this issue in hard-hit Black and brown communities, is that at play here?
Well, I think it's not at play here. It's the lack of leadership. I think Chief Downing mentioned the lack of leadership at the public safety level. I think you can look throughout the city and you see a lack of leadership. And that leadership is lacking because of what I call a go along to get along attitude. Now with me, you've got to get along with me first before I'll go along with you. But it's just the reverse in Long Beach. The assumption is that you will go along with whatever decision is made in order to get along with the people in power. And I think that that is one of the things that plagues our leadership. So that it doesn't matter what council person is in that district. It's the structure of the system that makes them respond in such a way. So the fact that Dr. Sully Sauro responds in a way that maybe D. Andrews responds is because of that system and the pressure of that system upon our elected officials.
I see. Well, I like to play for the both of you an exchange that took place between the Chief of Police, Councilman Al Austin, and now Vice Mayor Rex Richardson. And this was during a city council meeting in February. And in it, the two councilmen, along with the police chief, essentially spar as to what are the causes of violence in their districts and others. Now, Austin, he blames the illicit market and thugs, whereas Rex Richardson, he pushes for an intervention method. Here's the footage. We're going to come back to that. Mr. Downing, I wanted to ask you this. The city recently published the Public Health Approaches to Violence Prevention, a lot of long names. And that report came out April 20th. It outlines violence prevention resources, but it gave no crime statistics, no explicit explanation for the current crisis in crime. Does the city's practice of not reporting crime status or stats, does that undermine our public safety? What function does that play in keeping residents safe, not reporting this sort of stuff?
Well, to me, it's the very beginning of your ability to define your problem. And if you can't define your problem, you can't fix it. And so the statistical base, a proper statistical base, is the beginning of a study. And then the people that conduct the study, they break those statistics down. They ask a lot of questions. They go in the field. They do an analysis. They run it through computers. They run it through their academic wherewithal. And they collectively come together with at least a definition of the problem, and then they look to all the resources possible to approach the problem. And these problems are certainly not the kind of problem that can be approached with a singular approach. They're always multifaceted problems. These shootings, it's a multifaceted problems. These shootings amount to a pandemic. Okay, what did we do with the COVID pandemic? We kept statistics. The city and the health department set up a command post. They did daily analysis. They tracked everything. They found out who was sick and who wasn't sick. But we have a pandemic of shootings. We haven't nearly approached what we did with the pandemic involving COVID. So we don't know what the problem is, and therefore we can't solve the problem.
That's a compelling statement to make. And when you made the comparison, I see that. Why isn't it being dealt with the same as a pandemic? Dr. Norman, you talk in your book about transformational leadership. And I recall you writing, you said that new leadership will be required to transcend personal ambitions and individual agendas. Is it possible that personal ambitions are getting in the way of solutions to our city's rise in violence as well?
Well, I don't think that's any question, but that personal ambition is getting in the way. The video that, the audio that you were playing of the chief and his disagreements with the elected officials indicates that politics more than data or statistics play a role in what decisions are made. Chief Downing hit the nail on the head when he said that the public health approach is one which defines the problem. And so if you're looking at violence from a public health perspective, you first have to determine what is the problem, and in evaluating it, determine what are the risk factors, because those are the issues that you have to address if you want to have an impact on the problem. And if you don't identify the risk factors, two of whom are lack of educational attainment and poverty. Now those are the two most critical variables in violence. When I was with Rethinking Greater Long Beach, we conducted reports every year on the crime statistics as reported by the Long Beach Police Department to the FBI. Now, they don't include the issues that you were speaking of. They don't include the number of shootings, the kind of shootings. So that's information that we don't have. And you can't define a problem if there are data points that you don't have. And I quite frankly think that that's by design, that the city does not want us to have certain information so that we can't arrive at certain conclusions, because the brains are not confined to City Hall in Long Beach. There are thinking people all over the city. And when we see what's happening before our eyes, we question it. And our authorities want us to go along to get along. So that when we question or confront our elected officials, then we're met with, well, you're making this personal, or some other distracted reason that they're giving. But it really boils down to what Chief Downing said in the beginning, and it's the lack of leadership. It's the lack of leadership that in the district level that has each district council person operating in their own fiefdom. So the council person doesn't worry about what's happening in the next council district, only his or her council district. So that structure also has to be broken down so that we're not looking at simply my district, we're looking at Long Beach as a whole.
Dr. Norman just mentioned, he just dropped the word fiefdom. Now, one of the things that I've heard other newsmen like yourself describe is that it would be helpful if the Long Beach Police Department gave data by district. But you've written, I've read scores of your articles. Do you have a hard time getting data points, information from the Long Beach Police Department?
It's just not there. The required data that the Long Beach Police Department provides to the state and to the federal government is basic crime and arrest statistics. And they're not broken down by what we call reporting districts. For years, I have not seen crime data isolated by councilmatic district or census tract, and unless an academic can sit down and do an analysis of everything, crimes, the type of crime, the reports, number of gun sales that go into these areas, unless you can do that kind of breakdown that can facilitate your interviews and your study, you're just not going to be able to define the problem. And so it's very much like the debate between Mr. Richardson and Mr. Austin. They're both arguing from the seat of their pants, from their own perspectives, but they're not arguing through the knowledge of real data, real studies, real considered academic breakdown of what the problem is.
And you know, what was amazing was that it was Rex Richardson who came back and said, well, Chief, because the chief essentially was agreeing with Al. And so Rex comes back and he says, well, Chief, I want you to come back with data. Well, not only was the chief's report nearly a month late, he didn't meet the 30-day deadline, but also in his report, if we can call it that, no data, and none specifically to what issue was at hand. You know, Dr. Norman, just one last question for you. You published the Long Beach Equity Atlas in 2016, and according to your findings, socioeconomic inequality, this is what you wrote, socioeconomic inequality continues to divide on color lines, with whites in the upper fifth quintiles and people of color falling into the lowest fifth. Your report concludes that poverty and a lack of educational attainment are the two primary causes that most likely underlie criminal behavior. So that was 2016. Is it safe to say that we can't fix shootings without taking a careful look at our local economies and our local schools?
I don't think there's any question, but you've hit the nail on the head again, that those are two important parts of our solution. Because if, as we found in our data mining and our data analysis, that the highest correlation for violence was the critical factors of lack of educational attainment and poverty. Well, I'll think of it another way. If you went and you did a survey of all the incoming prisoners in terms of their educational attainment, what you would find is most of them are illiterate. So we know that education, or lack of educational attainment, is an issue that has to be addressed. I don't know that if we conducted a survey, if we wouldn't find the same things today. But unless we really do address the issues of the economy, and that means community economic development, not just economic development of the port, but how do we sustain our communities so that the young people who are the resources in this community stay in this community and invest what they've learned in this community for the benefit of everyone as a whole, rather than see it as an opportunity to escape to a better economic or social life in LA or Vegas or Arizona or somewhere else. And so we have to address that issue. We also have to address the issue of education. We can't continue to have a situation where 30% of our students who graduate, given an 8th grade test, 30% of our graduating students still can't pass a science test or a mathematics test. And that's not based on a 12th grade education. That's based on an 8th grade education. That's what our state tests do. So that we have to adapt a different attitude. In other words, we cannot accept mediocrity as a standard of performance and expect to get out of this problem. And we cannot arrest ourselves out of the problem of violence either. It has to be a cooperation between the police and the community. And the police have to remind themselves that they're part of the community, and we have to remind ourselves that we're part of the police. And that's a shared responsibility for public safety. It's just that the police are given a full-time job of caring for this. But the responsibility for public safety is not just with the elected officials, it's with community residents as well.
I've heard you, Mr. Downing, talk about that before too, the shared responsibility of community as well as the police. When you look at it from your perspective, can you just give, this is a lot for the audience. What's one thing that our police department could do different that would really help in shifting this narrative?
What would our police department do
Yes.
differently? Well, I think that real community relations policing, community-based policing,
And what does that look like?
well, to me, it looks like what I call the territorial imperative. Everyone involved in the police department, from the beat cop to the sergeant, to the lieutenant, to the commander, to the deputy chief, right up to the chief, they have a piece of territory that they're responsible for in terms of working with the community to deal with the problems of that community. Whether the problem is blight, graffiti, crime, whatever. Sir Robert Peel's 9 Principles of Policing are the 9 principles that was developed in England when the people decided, instead of me as a citizen doing my watch and word every night, we're getting busy, I need to hire somebody. They created a commission. They said, if we hire somebody, what do we want them to do? And they developed 9 principles.
Because initially,
And the main principle is the police are the people, and the people are the police.
the police are the people, and the people are the police.
That's correct. And if we approach it in that way, for example, city councils routinely, every time they have some kind of little teeny problem, they say, let's give it to the police. Let's make a law against it. Let's have the police go out and take care of it. Well, they need to restrain themselves from that. But on the other hand, we also need neighbors and people in neighborhoods to be ready to work in their neighborhood, and instead of calling for an armed police officer for the cat in the tree or the loud radio, they should have the kind of rapport in their own neighborhood where they say, let's turn down the radio, let's get the cat out of the tree, let's not tap into the resources of our city because we're a good neighborhood, let's work together. So it's an extension like that. The police are the people are the police. And if the police in such a way as that every individual in the department identified with a certain piece of territory, the people that live in that territory, the problems within that territory, and mark the corners and feel responsible and be there for a while. Do you know the cop in your neighborhood? I don't.
I don't.
I don't even know the commander in my neighborhood. We've had one meeting in my neighborhood in the 11 years I've lived, and we had the meeting because there was a robbery. And who came out? The commander. And she brought a civilian that she called her civilian coordinator of crime prevention. Well, the cop on the beat should have been there, but we don't have a regular cop on the beat. Mm-hmm. So he doesn't really know about our neighborhood, or he doesn't know about our people. We've had officers come into the neighborhood just two months ago. There was a little accident in the neighborhood, and clearly a rookie was in the car with the veteran officer. The rookie got out. He did a wonderful job. He had a nice personality, and he took the reports and he gave all the information. A number of us were sitting in our front yards. The veteran officer remained in the car the whole time with his windows up. And to me, he could have got out. He could have taken the time to supervise his rookie a little bit, but he also could have taken the time to chat with some of the neighbors. Mm-hmm. What's going on? I'm so-and-so. What's going on in the neighborhood? Let me tell you about this. None of that happened. He stayed in the car with his windows rolled up. He knows nothing about our neighborhood.
It's fascinating. A lot of that seems just sort of basic human nature that your parents are supposed to teach you. You know, meeting your neighbors, saying hello. Dr. Norman, I'm going to give you the last word. I heard you speaking before we got out, and you revealed a truth that I don't feel bad saying now. You said that you've been on this earth almost 90 years. Mm-hmm. So as someone who's been here that long, what motivation can you give to a family that's starting out here in Long Beach? To hang in there?
I really don't know that there is anything that you can say to a family who has been struggling for all their lives and still can't get their head above water, because you've got to be in that position to give advice. But what I would suggest to anyone who is facing adversity or challenges is that persistence is a commodity. And it's a very important commodity for longevity. And as an African American, I owe it to my ancestors to not give up, because my ancestors didn't give up against tremendous odds. My grandfather was killed by the Ku Klux Klan because he defended his wife from being raped by an insurance salesman. And that was motivation for us to, if he could give his life for the honor of his woman, then we should carry that forward, not just for ourselves, but for our entire community. So I think that what we need to do is look at the things that helps each of us individually and share that with the broad community. So I would simply say to the people who, in the face of adversity, feel that they can go no further, to take that step. It's just a matter of putting one foot before the other. And beyond that, there is no choice. We have no choice. We can either give up or we can give out. And I say don't give up.
Persistence. Well, gentlemen, you've given us a lot to chew on, and I hope our city leaders and our residents are humble enough to listen. I want to give my thanks to retired Deputy Chief. Also, thank you, Professor Norman. It was a pleasure having the both of you, and I want you to know that you always have a space here and that you're welcome anytime. Thank you. Up next, we have a Long Beach native who's made a big splash locally onto the cryptocurrency scene. We're excited to learn how he did it and pick up any sound investment tips he might have for other millennials. But first, let's head over to the beach with Shemaya Joy. She was at the gigantic new play structure near Junipero. Shemaya?
If you are afraid of heights, the playground at Junipero is the best for me. This playground is part of a $5 million project. It's paid for by the city's Thailand fund. This playground is so fun, but since COVID-19, there's a lot of touchy contact. So make sure when you're at a playground like this, wear your mask and wash your hands. Next to the playground is a cafe, but it's still under construction. The mayor calls all the construction at the beach a home run. The hope is that our beach will be awesome for 2028 Olympics Games. I'm not ready to play the Olympic Games. My favorite part about the playground was its life. Except for that kid I almost collided with. This is Shemaya Sims, reporting for all the fun in Long Beach and reporting for the Memo.
That's the one,
Yeah.
right? 3.
One. I'm sorry, 3, you're right.
You're live.
All right. So we're back. We have such a special guest right now. His name is Sanai Coffee. Did I pronounce that right?
Kinfei.
Kinfei.
Yeah.
Sanai did something incredible. He was a part of the, what do they call it? There's a name for GameStop. GameStop Sanai invested. He won big. But what I love about your story is that you're giving back. And so in early December, you buy GameStop stock, right, at $12 a share.
I bought it earlier, but that's when I became public about it. I like to...
Oh, you kept it on the low.
Well, you know, I feel like within respect of the community that I'm a part of, you know, it's best to show some caution before we try to stimulate people into make certain moves. But yeah, December is when I start speaking.
So at its height, I think the stock almost got to $500 a share. How did you know that it was the right time to make that investment?
Well, in August, I originally was following a man. He's by the name of Michael Burry. Michael Burry is the person behind what we know. It was a movie made a couple of years ago called The Big Short. He's the main character played by Christian Bale. But he's a finance guy, and he put out a white paper, which is like a financial analysis about, you know, what was potentially to be a short squeeze on GameStop. And I just looked at the analytics, and it's a viable company. They make money, and it was being betted against. So I made a calculated, you know, decision.
So much of what you've accomplished in life, right, it doesn't fit the larger the stat or the stereotype. And what I mean is, here you are, a black man. You're raised in Central Long Beach by a single mother. You didn't graduate college, but you own a bookstore. You own real estate. You got a stock portfolio. GameStop wasn't your only stock.
No.
So, do you see yourself as an anomaly? And then secondly, is it possible to improve our city in ways that will result in more stories like you?
What do you mean when you say our city? Like
Long Beach.
the people as a whole here? No, I think that, well, let me answer the first question.
Do you see yourself as an anomaly?
Of course, I think that I am a conjunction of, you know, privilege and opportunities and culture meeting at a head. I feel privileged. I'm not trying to say this because the camera's on, but I feel privileged to have grown up in an impoverished environment because I started at the bottom. So I had personally, I felt like I had no choice but to hustle, you know.
So you see poverty as a privilege.
In a weird
So
sense.
that's a mindset.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's an accountability conversation there, but you know, with respect to me, I grew up with my mother. I live in the same building that I grew up in. There was a calculated decisions that I made early in life. You know, I was contributing to my household at 9 years old, and that's not something that is in a lot of people's narratives. To answer your original question about an anomaly, yeah, a set of events propelled me to, you know, seek out very early monetary, you know, responses to the things I was going through. I just was hip enough at a very early age to fixate a lot of my time and energy towards the stock market and the financial realm as a whole. In terms of your second question about the city, yeah, I don't think that the city has the infrastructure to allow collective success. If we're talking about the community that I come from, there's a reason why people hear about things in December or in January or in February, but they didn't hear about it in July and August. Because when I bought it in August, it was $3. When people were starting to listen to me, which really was in January, it was about $37.
Well,
with respect to the GameStop one.
I feel like you're doing things currently to sort of scale your knowledge. And what I mean by that is you've actively gone into the community. For instance, you've gone to the Bluff. And anybody who, you know, knows anything about Long Beach knows that at the Bluff, there's yoga on the Bluff, free daily, right? And you're kind of changing the game because one of the things I love about you is that you're doing a sort of financial TED Talk at the Bluff,
Sure.
right?
For free.
Now, for free, just like yoga at the Bluff. So what's your goal with that, and what was the nepotism?
Do you want me to be honest?
Heck yeah.
Okay, I hate yoga on the Bluff. I think it's a gentrifier nonsense that's allowed to happen because it provides outsiders with an opportunity to exist. When I was a child, that Bluff, we used to play soccer on that Bluffs. And then these yoga people, I don't know who they pushed. I think it was Suja, I think.
Susan Lowenthal?
Yeah, I think it was around her time when they start putting the boulders on the Bluffs so that we couldn't play soccer on those Bluffs. So for me, I am not a fan of that whole thing. It's interesting to me that we can make space. Just to be clear, I grew up going to Kings Park and Vets Park, right? If I was to get the people that we do the Bluff thing with, if I was to get 100 people to come to Kings Park and we're talking about finances, the police would come. But for some reason, we can do it on the Bluffs, right? Oh, not only would the police come, they would ask me if I have a permit. But on the Bluffs, you have 100 plus people in the middle of COVID stretching it out and having some spiritual journey, no offense. But that being said, somehow you can have a spiritual journey in public, but you can't have an economic journey in public. And that's what I mean about the accountability thing. I don't believe in making space for one thing, but we can't make space for another. There's a balance. I come from a community in Central Long Beach, colloquially the East Side. We're dealing with economic issues. We're not dealing with spiritual issues solely. You know, people are trying to feed their family. People are trying to pay their rent. People are dealing with affordability issues, housing insecurity, economic, workforce development problems. They're not dealing with, you know, issues with their joints or their chakras. But somehow, if we were to get a grouping of them and organize people in our community to talk about these things in a public space that we pay as taxpayers for, you know, the police would come. So that was the impetus.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. And I didn't know about that history.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because Yoga on the Bluff is kind of citywide, looked at positively, but I don't think people know about those origins. That's interesting. You said in an interview that getting rich has not been your goal, but your goal has been stability. And I think that resonates with a lot of millennials in Long Beach. So what sort of advice or tips would you give to the everyday Long Beach millennial who wants more financial stability in their life?
Downsize.
Downsize
Your lifestyle. You have very few options except that. If you're in a romantic setting, move in with that person, break the rent down, start saving, start investing. If you don't need a car, get rid of it. If you eat out more than 3 times in a month, stop. I wish it was not as simple as that, but the fact of the matter is this: if you are a millennial, right now, you will not have Social Security sustainable enough to beat inflation and rising housing and lifestyle costs.
So when we get to the age of Social Security,
sure,
that will be
probably
enough.
77 by the time we are.
So the age will rise,
correct,
and it won't be enough for us to meet our expenses.
Not at all. And so
you're telling me that the first step on the road to Mr. GameStop here is downsize.
I went from paying for an apartment that I worked 6 days a week to enjoy for 1 day a week to downsizing and moving in with 4 other men. Just to be clear, this isn't everyone's options. I'm just speaking to my experience. And I went from paying over $1,300 to paying $585. It wasn't now an opportunity for me to spend $715 because I didn't have that rent.
Right.
It was an opportunity now to invest $715. And so that's why in 3 years of investing, I put $18,000 in my individual retirement account. And in the third year, I had $95,000. And I used that $95,000 to buy my mother, who's never lived in a house in her entire time in this city, her house.
Wow.
That she lives in right now, in the neighborhood that I grew up in.
So you bought your mother a house in the neighborhood you grew up in.
And I live in the apartment that I grew up in.
You purchased the apartment.
No. I live in it.
You live in it.
Yeah. I purchased another place too.
You purchased another place. Address will not be disclosed.
Yeah.
I heard you talking about something earlier, and it was...
And not to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
This is the irony of rent cap versus rent stabilized, right? Because if it was a Section 8 place, I wouldn't be able to live in the apartment I grew up in because my earning requirement, I wouldn't match the earning requirement. But the irony is that because we have these current rent caps that we have, they can only raise my rent to like $75 a year. So it behooves me to stay where I belong.
During the pandemic, I was on IG, on Facebook. You were holding food drives.
Yes.
Through your shop, and we've talked about you starting to teach financial literacy at the Bluff
For free.
for free. Yeah. If viewers want to support you or learn from you, what's the best way for them to stay connected?
You can walk into the shop that I run with my two brothers, Ryan Hoyle and Ron Jenkins. It's called Play Nice. It's at 1029 East 4th Street, and you can support us. With regards to the food that we were giving out, we did that out of pocket.
That wasn't coming from a grant that you got.
I'm very anti the non-profit industrial complex that this city is so so fond of, because those are the people who called the health department on us.
Wait, so you were doing the food drive and the health department was called on you?
Yes. And then what was crazy is the health department said, you should work with these groups, blank, blank, blank.
Other nonprofits.
Specific ones. And then, even funnier, is that 4 months down the line, this COVID money comes in, and then what do they say? They say, we have a grant for refrigerated public food to be given out. But that was what I was written up for. I just listened to the park commission bring that up this morning. So it's hilarious to me because I don't know what your viewers the markup of the audience is, but and I'm generalizing, so anyone that this doesn't relate to, please don't take offense. But oftentimes I see responses towards the black community about like self-empowerment and do it yourself and pull yourself up by your bootstraps. So here I am, someone who's
doing that.
I'm doing that, and I still live in the community that I grew up, and I willingly chose for a pay cut to create a business in the community that I grew up in, and here I am trying to do these things that you're telling us to do for ourselves, and then you say stop doing that for yourself, do it in collaboration, i.e. under the employment of
whatever federal money, state monies.
Yeah.
Got it. I want folks, though, to pay attention to something, and I keep hearing. You told me that since 9 years old, you were playing a role financially in your household.
That's a fact.
The business that you opened in Long Beach is a bookstore.
Correct.
You said that you invested in the GameStop stock because you read something. I keep hearing, I work and I read. So it's not only downsizing, it's reading. What role does reading play in who Sanai Coffee is?
Well, I'll just say this. I am a proud recipient and child of the Long Beach Unified School District. And I grew up going to the Burnett branch on Atlantic and Hill. That's where I first was given the opportunity to venture outside of this environment that I grew up in. I didn't know that there was a world outside of the world that was a 5-6 block radius of me until the opportunities that were given to me by groups like CNAC, the Central Neighborhood Advisory Committee, which is the oldest housing association in Central Long Beach, as well as a couple other groups in the area, and the books that they provided, so that I had a very keen idea of self, and I recognize that a lot of the experiences that I've gone through are nothing but living examples of the resiliency of my community, and that there are other people who have gone through them and done way greater things for the common collective good of the community. So I was incentivized, I guess, to step up. I've always had to step up. My mom, I went to Jackie Robinson. Well, first I went to Holy Innocents. Then when my parents split, we couldn't afford for me to go there no more, and they stopped having their scholarships for local kids in the area. So I went to Jackie Robinson, and I got in a fight every day for about 2-3 weeks.
Because of that transition?
I just think because I knew how to read in the second grade. They were teaching children their ABCs, and I already knew multiplication, division, and I read at an 8th grade level when I was in the second grade. So that's why, to your point about the anomaly. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because my mother had to lie about my address so that I can go to George Washington Carver, which is a school in an area where they didn't even know he was a black man. He was a black botanist.
They didn't even know that.
There was no
photo. When I was there, they hear George Washington, and they assume that
there was no photo of him at the school the entire time that I was there. So, that being said, my mother, who worked at Harem Jones, and she worked in Cerritos at Nordstrom's, she didn't have time to take me to school. So my mom took 2 city buses there from 7 to 12 years old, and my mom took me one time on the 102 going up, and she said, "You know how to get back home?" I said, "Yeah." She's like, "This is how you're going to get to school every day, because we don't have these opportunities that other people have." My mother didn't have a car, and she's doing the best that she can. So this is not normal. I mean, this is normal to me. This isn't like, oh man, I just stumbled into this and I just read a book. Like, this is my life. And it's one thing to have these individual successes. The issue that I have with a lot of people, they have these individual success stories, and then they flee the spaces that hardened them and provided them with the tools to be successful. So I would never, as long as I live in America, I would never leave the neighborhood that I live in currently, unless I go to Africa.
I'm going to put you on the spot.
Sure.
I want you to promise me that you'll come back and give financial tips here.
Easily.
I love it.
Easily.
Thanks, Sanai. Appreciate
no problem.
you coming.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. I want to thank Sanai for coming onto the show tonight. It's true, stories like his that remind us of the creative power of Long Beach locals. We truly are a dynamic city. Up next, we're sitting down with the guest who is among a growing consensus of North Long Beach residents, who wants to see a pocket park named after decades-long community advocate Dan Pressburg. But first, let's turn to a local foodie spotlight that all of you seafood lovers just might find both interesting and tasty. Our reporter Sabrina Cupid was at the USA Daily Live Seafood Market. Sabrina?
Thanks, Franklin. As Long Beach begins to open up, we wanted to showcase a local business here for all of you seafood lovers. This is the USA Daily Live Seafood Market, where you get the frozen food. This place is firm and hard. Well, the crabby lobsters like orange, but it's best to get there early. The USA Daily, very confident.
Thank you, Sabrina. Welcome back to a special Long Beach local news broadcast of the Memo. I'm Franklin Sims. Public comment is a cornerstone of any democracy. But in Long Beach, the opportunity to have your voice heard by local government isn't always protected. When the Migrant Children Detention Center went before City Council, Mayor Garcia was criticized for tipping the scale, with public comment coming almost exclusively from his supporters. On the other side of the coin, Tuesday night, City Council meetings have been known to drag on sometimes until the wee hours of the morning. To help with efficiency, the mayor created 9 committees. Each is chaired by one of our 9 district council persons. The idea was that by adding committees that meet throughout the month, opportunities for public comment would improve. Still, there are voices that remain unheard, if not silenced. Here on the Memo, we've carved out time in our segment to assure that these voices get a chance at the mic as well. South Street Parkway is a pocket park in North Long Beach. Recently, more than a dozen Long Beach residents waited in line to speak in support of the pocket park to be named after North Long Beach resident Dan Pressburg. Weeks before, Councilman Al Austin sidelined the naming. He claimed that Pressburg had no community support. We're going to check in with our producers and find out if we can play that footage.
This is the pocket park that Vice Mayor Rex Richardson wants to name, honoring resident Dan Pressburg. Pressburg lives there in the historic dairy. Well, Al Austin says no, emphatically no. He doesn't want the pocket park to be named after Dan Pressburg. He says that Dan Pressburg just doesn't have the community support needed.
So we're having some technical difficulties our first time out the box, but you guys hang in there with us. The next time that the committee met, Dan's support was overwhelming. The community showed up for Dan Pressburg. But when the community showed up en masse, they weren't given an opportunity to speak. Councilman Darryl Supernaw chairs the committee. He says that the decision was made based on advice from the city attorney's office. Pressburg supporters say that according to Robert's Rule of Order, testimony can be taken as long as an item is on the agenda. The item was on the agenda, but the testimonies were never heard. We'd like to break what has become an unhealthy practice of silencing, or at least the perception of it. One of the unheard speakers was Dan Pressburg's son, Aaron. Here's what Aaron would have written had he been given the chance. The letter has been shared with us, and I want to read it to you now. It reads, "My father is Dan Pressburg. I know there is an issue of support for the renaming of South Street Parkway in his honor, and there really shouldn't be. The parkway has been tended to and cared for by my father before the first seed was planted there. My father lives, breathes, and bleeds North Long Beach. He has fought for the uptown community that he raised his children and grandchildren in. He has sacrificed his time and often livelihood to create a legacy, not only for my sister and myself, but for our children. I remember being a little kid, growing up in a barn next to a poorly paved alleyway and a dirt lot with no fence. I remember being 7 years old, making that lot into a dirt track to ride bikes and drive RC cars and do cool tricks, but suddenly was too full of trash to play in. That's not the case today. Over the last 30 plus years, my father has bagged the garbage, fought to get fencing, helped plant trees and flowers, and I'm pretty sure he's mowed the grass once or twice in that parkway. He was instrumental in getting the city to create the grassy area and put up fencing, creating a clean, relaxing area. It was a gorgeous contrast to the filth and dirt and danger that filled the place before. The most important thing about the parkway was that he never asked for recognition for it. He never said, "This is mine," even though he took pride in looking out of his window and seeing something he helped create. He never said, "Someone else should pay me," because the parkway is its own reward. A swath of beauty near a historical landmark. The parkway absolutely should be named for my dad, but it doesn't have to be. He's never wanted to own that area, but cares for it as though he did. And whether or not you put his name on that sign, he has left and continues to leave an indelible mark on the north side of Long Beach. His legacy continues through the committees and programs he's founded and chaired over the years, through the annual Veterans Day Parade, through annual community Christmas party that has hosted nearly anyone from an average citizen to members of the city council and the state legislature. And his legacy is clearest among single time a car drive. The Long Beach Dairy and Creamery slows down to get a real good look at the big house plucked from out of time and the shaded grassy area next to it. And they say, "Man, that's a real cool place." So no matter what the name is on the sign, it will always be Pressburg Parkway to the community he's cultivated, to the neighborhood and the folks lucky enough to call Dan Pressburg part of their family. Signed, Aaron Pressburg. Aaron, thank you for sharing your letter with us and with your community. Please give your father our regards, and we want you to know that here at Long Beach Local News, as well as the Memo, we'll keep a close eye on this story. Everyone knows that talking politics is taboo. No politics at the dinner table. We've all heard it before. But politics is just a fancy word for people and families. Like any family, neighborhood, or community, we have challenges. Most of us want our families, and our city for that matter, to be healthy. How we get there begins with conversations like we had tonight. Our hope here at the Memo and at Long Beach Local News is that the next time you're seated at the dinner table or a local restaurant with family or friends, you'll begin to have these conversations too. Conversations about how we can slow shootings in our city, how we can change the financial future for residents living in North, Central, and West Long Beach. Because whether it's naming a pocket park or demanding accurate crime data, we can't get to a better city without you. That's it for the Memo tonight. Join us again next week for another live broadcast with our friends here at Long Beach Local News. This is Franklin Sims, reporting truth to power.